Of this page to discuss what might happen. It says anthropological files contain many examples of societies sure of their place in the universe which have disintegrated when they had to associate with previously unfamiliar societies expounding different ideas and different life ways. Others that survived such an experience usually did so by paying the price of changes in values and attitudes and behavior. What the document was warning was that if NASA were to discover extraterrestrials or even their artifacts, the social consequences conceivably could lead to the, quote, disintegration of civilization. Now, it's important that you keep this document, this official NASA study, in the back of your mind as we go through the rest of the evening. Because what we have here is a political and social and logical paradox, a contradiction. On the one hand, we have formed an agency which is supposed to be the most open, the most candid, the most honest, the most ethical, the most inquisitive on behalf of all Americans in the history of the Republic. And on the other hand, we have set out a blueprint that in one area, one important, crucial area, that it may find data. It may, in fact, find data that contains within it the seeds of the destruction of the Republic itself. And what you have to ask, and what I'm going to show happened at the end of the evening, is what apparently was done with this logical paradox, stretching now across decade after decade after decade. Because as you see this data, and you ask yourself what I've asked myself over and over and over again, having been a member of, the media, having sat at the right hand of Walter Cronkite, which is one step below, the right hand of the other guy, having been in NASA and outside of NASA, having seen thousands of pictures, having experienced, lived through the most incredible adventure and journey in the history of mankind, as I began to find what we're going to look at, I had to ask myself over and over and over again, Hoagland, are you crazy? How could anyone have missed this? And the answer, I believe, will be found in this document. So I'm going to save the ending of the document, what the recommendations of Brookings to NASA back in 1959 were if NASA were to discover extraterrestrial artifacts, and proceed on with the story of how we got involved. Because our entry into this saga, this unfolding adventure, was relatively late. It wasn't until about 1983 that I became intrigued with this object, which, by the way, fits the parameters of the Brookings study. This could well be an artifact discovered by NASA, by Viking, in the course of its expanding unmanned exploration of the solar system, which could well indicate that somehow, somewhere, in some time, someone came before. Nothing unscientific, nothing outrageous, nothing strange. Because NASA's own studies had predicted that we might find ourselves in this situation. Well, from my beginning naive involvement with asking and trying to answer the question, is this a real artifact? What happened was I wound up setting up several subsequent investigations, ranging from the independent Mars investigation to the Mars investigation group to now the Mars mission, all in an effort to inveigle scientists away from their day jobs to pursue something that may be a tad more important in the long run, namely verification that the human race is not alone. Because as we looked at the official treatment of the Viking data, there was a brilliant and blinding denial of the possibility that this information could be real or have any significance. Well, in the course of the last decade plus, not only have we, to the best of our ability, believe we have confirmed the reality of the so-called monuments of Mars, We have found a stunning geometry which links these structures around the face, which includes pyramids and other unusual morphological shapes and forms. We have found that there appears to be a mathematics encoded in this geometry, which if you were asked to reduce it to one important symbol, it would be this. In 2 dimensions, it would be an equilateral triangle. In 3 dimensions, something called a tetrahedron. And as we go through the evening, I will explain why this symbology is very, very important in decoding not only the monuments of Mars, but in now demonstrating and possibly proving a connection between Mars and the Moon. Because if you look at the logic of an alien civilization on another planet, creating its own structures, or trying to send messages to others that might inhabit the night and might come its way someday, what you find is that there is only one basic intralingua, one basic common language that we and they would ever have in common. And it is the language of science. It's the language of physics, the language of chemistry, the language of basic Euclidean geometry on a small scale. The language of science itself. So, in retrospect, it is not all bizarre that we should have been successful in decoding the meaning of the monuments, because the geometry which we have found over and over and over again redundantly is telling us that whoever did that was trying to communicate the same fundamental constants by which our own lives and our own technology are ruled today. And therefore, we do have something in common, and we can figure it out. Well, these aren't new ideas. It turns out that in the last century, the giants of science, people like Carl Friedrich Gauss and Lockyer and even Lowell, were thinking and writing and proposing the same ideas. Except for them, they were imagining if they were, quote, Martians looking at the Earth, and they were trying to devise, in the Victorian rising idiom of science, some kind of means of signaling the presence of Earthmen. It was a Victorian era, of course. Earthmen out to the universe, out to whoever would be looking at Earth with Victorian-type telescopes. And what did they propose? They proposed creating things like this: huge Pythagorean theorems and geometric figures and triangles in the deserts of the Sahara, digging them with bulldozers and lighting them with flaming oil so they could be seen at night by Martians peering through telescopes millions of miles away, looking at the night side of the world. There was another group that proposed planting fir trees in huge geometric symbols on the steppes of Siberia to accomplish the same end. But the thing that links those ideas with what we have discovered in the monuments of Mars is simple: geometry. The common geometry of conscious beings inhabiting the same universe, operating by the same physics and by the same laws, and looking out at the same phenomenon. Well, this whole story, here's the commercial, is encoded in another language, English, in this book, which is now in its 9th or 10th printing, I forget which we updated in 1992. It's called The Monuments of Mars, and it contains basically a narrative of everything we have learned up to this evening. You will not find this evening within those covers. However, there's another book that I want to bring to your attention, and it's this book. This was a document which was handed to NASA literally on the eve of Mars observers' disappearance last year. It is an intensive report conducted by Professor Stan McDaniel, former chairman of the philosophy department of Sonoma State University, an epistemologist, an ethicist, an historian of science, who began naively wondering why NASA had not targeted Mars Observer to photograph and either falsify or verify the monuments of Mars. And what began as a very naive question extended for about 1.5 years of his life and wound up being a 200-plus page report with 300 to 400 meticulous footnotes and references, all attesting to the fact that NASA, on the Viking data, vis-a-vis Cydonia, vis-a-vis the so-called monuments of Mars, vis-a-vis the face, has been doing everything but science. And for us to say it, who obviously have a vested interest, is one thing. But when an independent referee